sponsors. So this would obviously not help, we wouldn't be able to do this if we didn't have our sponsors. So I'd like to thank our College Central network, along with Mountain Sac and Live and Jackie Kennedy Harris and 06 Media. Thank you for, helping in this event. And some of these sponsors that we've had have obviously done it over a period of time and many years. So we appreciate your partnership. Contentment is the word that best describes Aaron. And as a versatile consultant, facilitator, keynote speaker, and coach, he is responsible for delighting New Leaf's clients with consistently outstanding work. Aaron has nearly 20 years of experience leading teams to achieve organizational results and is educated at the bachelor's and master's level. He is New Leaf subject matter expert for this subject, time management. The name of your session today is Time Management, Practical Solutions to the 5 Most Common Time Challengers. Take it away, Aaron.
Well, it's good to be with everybody. You might have noticed in the chat function, I went ahead and, if you don't have this already, supplied some links for an assessment that we're going to take together, but also the workbook that you'll want to walk through as we go through today's presentation. And so if you see there in the chat function, that should be under the big AM, Aaron Miller. That's going to be very helpful for you today. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and we will get started. So again, my name is Aaron Miller and been with New Leaf for about 5 years now. And it's been a wonderful journey working with Paul Butler, who was our founder. He came over across the big pond in 2006 from the UK, and he established this training and development business. We are housed here. Our main California West Coast location is here in Valencia, California. And then we have an East Coast location there in Orlando as well. And we've been able to grow and be successful all across the United States, but also across Western Europe, India, China, Australia. And I think one of the reasons we've been so successful, as you'll find, is as we go through today's material, there really is a difference between technique and principle. All right, and so what is the difference between technique and principles? Well, techniques tend to be time-stamped. And so since that's the case, techniques tend to then shift and change. But principles are quite different. Principles actually, they exist without our permission. They, you could say, are absolute. And so we think about how certain things that maybe we were raised with ever since we were children, like the golden rule, that would be kind of a principle. You treat other people the way that you want to be treated. Or maybe in the physical sciences, a way to think about principles is the law of gravity. Gravity exists without your permission. You go ahead and try to defy gravity or defy it, you're going to lose every single time. And so the reason why this is helpful is because when we are walking through anything that New Leaf would offer, whether it be consulting, a seminar, a webinar, like in this case, everything's going to derive from those principles, which means, here's the helpful thing, here's the fun thing. There's wisdom in the room. I don't think that anything that we're going to walk through today in terms of talking about time management, I don't think anyone in the room is going to sit there and go like, wow, I have literally never thought of that before. We are going to discuss things that you really do already know. And we're going to find that there are certain things that you just can't not know because of the human element. And so because that's the case, we all actually can walk in these things. And that really becomes the issue. Not so much, hey, I didn't know these things before, because I guarantee you, you're going to be like, I know these things. The question really is, am I walking what I already know? And so for our purposes today, we want to make sure that it's helpful. We keep a steady pace. And so I want to make 3 promises to you today. Here's the first promise. Number 1, you're not going to get bored. We won't have time enough for you to get bored, but I'm going to keep a steady pace. And as we're going through the material, my second promise is that there's going to be some participation for you in your own self-reflection as your own application in the area of time management, which means then we're going to discuss things. The third promise is what we're going to discuss. It's very, very practical. Okay. Here at New Leaf, we believe that in order to be successful in the world of work, above and beyond just your technical skills, you really do need to master 3 things. The first one is you have to have the ability to manage yourself, all right? Good thing is we're going to talk about that today as it would relate to our subject matter. Secondly, you have to have the ability to lead other people, which basically we have to know how to influence other people. Again, when it comes to time management, we're going to talk about that today as well. The third thing, which we won't talk about in order to be successful in the world of work, is the ability to understand business financial intelligence, basically the money-making schemes of the institution or the organization that you work with. All right, so let's get started. We're just going to jump right into it. Now, many of you have seen this diagram in some way, shape, or form before. All right, sometimes it's known as the see, do, and get model. You see here that there are a set of perceptions, right, that we all have. So it's a lens that we all kind of see ourselves in. We see other people. We see our superiors, our coworkers. All of life goes through a lens perception, right? Now, our perceptions, again, of ourselves, of other people, of our circumstances, they lend themselves to a certain set of behaviors, right? And so when perceptions and behaviors correspond and work in concert, it brings about a set of results, for good or for bad, right? Now, we tend to get our perceptions based upon past experiences, the way that we perhaps were raised, and those behaviors are directly aligned with those perceptions. And then we walk in the results, again, in good ways or also bad ways. We make mistakes, we hit the buffer on certain circumstances, and we learn the hard way perhaps, and that's a learning moment. But the question that I have today, as we're looking at this model, is what would you suppose is at the center of this diagram? What holds these three domains or these three realities together? Little hint, we've already kind of talked about it. Here at New Leaf, we're going to suggest they are principles. Principles. Now, what have we already determined about principles? Well, again, principles exist whether we want to acknowledge them or not. They exist without our permission, which means, again, this is the good news. There are things that we already do know. There are things that we can't ignore. There are things that we can't not know. Let's put it that way, the double negative being intentional. So when it comes to time management, what are some things that we could learn? What are some principles that we're going to have our conversation on today? What's the principle of time management? Here's the principle we're going to work off of. It's very simple. We cannot manage time. At best, we can manage our priorities, effective relationships, and efficient processes. These things can help, but we cannot manage our time. And what we're going to see today is that we can manage ourselves, and we can perhaps work on other things like processes that will ultimately pay off in a certain set of results that we want to walk in. Now, again, I want to draw your attention to that assessment that I gave you. I handed it to you, or I rather put it to you in the chat function. But if you would just take up a few minutes, open that up, and would you go through that assessment and kind of just rate yourself, be honest, don't overanalyze anything that's there. It kind of gives you a helpful point of reference for how to view yourself in the area of time management. I will set the clock for 2 to 3 minutes, and then we will bring it back center. Ready, set, and go. All right, let's go ahead and bring it back center. Again, we didn't want you to overthink that exercise. We didn't want you to be too laborious with it, but hopefully doing something like this will give you a little window perhaps into your own habits and your own disciplines in the area of time management. We would suggest maybe taking that same exercise perhaps at some distant date in the future. It could be a week out, it could be a month out, it could be 3 months out. In order to change a habit, they say typically you need 60 to 90 days to do that. And so as we're walking through some of this material, maybe some things will stand out to you that you think, hey, maybe I should change that. Maybe I should tweak this area of my life or this area of my week flow, my day-to-day, and just make notes of that throughout this time that we have today. And hopefully some things will surface for you. And yeah, that's what we want. We want results, right? Well, let's keep going. In the area of time management, believe it or not, we really do think that it comes down to 2 types of time management challenges. Now, some people would want to push back on that and say there's no way that it's that binary, but we really are convinced that it is. And it comes down to, get this, people and process. People and process, which propose or offer the two types of time management challenges. What are some common time challenges that you can think through just as you're sitting there reflecting, that you could categorize as being primarily a people issue or a process issue, right? I think if we think about it long enough, we can come down to thinking about how people and how process, whether it's interactions with coworkers or with our superiors, or it's a process that we find ourselves stuck in, these things contribute to the area of time management. When it comes to people, what is the goal with people? Well, the goal is always to build and sustain trust. Now, that's easy to say, but it's really hard to do if we're honest. And if you were to think of trust as an icon that you double clicked, right? What we would find is that trust is a combination of character and competence. So we tend to trust people who have high character, it's like who they are, right? And who have high competence. And that's basically what they do. And think about it, people. We know exactly how this would play out. Like, we might appreciate somebody who has character, but if they're not competent to lead us in a particular direction, or they're not competent for the sake of the project, we're not going to trust them. We might love their heart. We might appreciate their character, but we're not going to trust them. Conversely, you could find someone who is highly competent. They know the material, they know the channels, they're familiar with the layout or their territory, but they lack that character. Well, look, I know lots of really smart, competent people I wouldn't leave my children with, right? And so we really find that when we think about trust as it relates to people, it comes down to character and competence. And so the goal with people is to always build trust. Now, what's the goal when it comes to processes? Well, the goal of process is always to build, or to rather minimize or reduce time, right? No one jumps into a project really wanting to take as much time as possible in that endeavor. And so when it comes to managing our time and the challenges that we have to overcome and the areas that we have to address, they are going to be categorically in the area of people and in the area of process, which means we have to learn to build trust, and we have to look at the systems that we find ourselves in, the sandbox of our work, and identify those systems and those processes which tend to either rob our time or cause the team to bottleneck in a particular way that doesn't allow for efficiency to endure. And so we want to make sure that as we go along the way, that we're dealing with material that we really can control. Remember, we can't control time. You're not going to be able to control your time. You can't manage your time at all. You can't take away 1 minute of your life or add 1 minute. You can't add another hour to the day or take away another hour, but you can manage yourself. And so the goal with people, again, is to build trust, and the goal of process is always to reduce time. So that's the question before you. As you sit there and you ponder, what could I do to build trust? What could I do to reduce time? I would recommend that perhaps on some note paper that you might have, or even the workbook that we have, sit and ponder that in terms of your work relationships and your day-to-day systems and processes that you find yourselves in. What could you do to build trust with those around you and to reduce your time? Remember, you have to think of things that you can control. I'm going to give you 1 minute just to ponder that and to make notes in those two categories, somewhere perhaps on your workbook. Ready, set, and go. Now, again, I want to encourage you in this area, because remember, these are things that you really do know. You're familiar with what it means to work with people in your sphere and in your domain, and the little things that you would need to do in order to build that trust. I want you to think of something. Think on this. Can you control anybody? Now, we might like to think that we could, but can we actually control other people? and what they think and how they perceive you or themselves or other people. Listen, just down on a very basic philosophical level, you can't control anybody, but you can control yourselves, right? And there's the gold mine in this. You can control yourself, and time management comes down to self-management. And so if you're going to build trust with people, you have to ask questions not about the other people as much as you have to ask questions about yourself. Now, when it comes to the process and how to reduce time, again, you're familiar with the domain in which you work as well. Ask questions about where things are perhaps robbing you of minutes here and there, or things are bottlenecking in a process that you're caught in. Use your relationships and the trust that you have with those relationships to perhaps bring about a better solution in the area of process. But we'll keep going. I just wanted you to make some notes and remember that you really do know these things. It just takes some effort perhaps to sit and ponder and to meditate and ask good questions. Again, not so much of other people, you can't control them, but controlling yourself, managing yourself, asking what you can do in the domain that you find yourself. Well, let's keep right along. We find at New Leaf that the best way to manage ourselves in the time that we have really is putting into practice weekly planning. Now, I don't know how many of you actually do weekly planning, but we find that there's a direct correlation to people who manage their time better and those who practice weekly planning. Weekly planning, it helps see the big picture from 7 days out. It helps you understand at a kind of a bird's eye view of what can be done in one day. And if it can't be done in one day, you have that scope of a week to push it off to the next day. We find that it's useful for our personal lives as well. And again, the beautiful thing about weekly planning. So for me, I do it on Sunday night, right? It takes about an hour. I just look at my full focus planner. I look at my Outlook calendar and I fill in, as I see it, all the big pieces. And I look at it a Monday through Saturday, perhaps, of what that week's going to look like. Now, here are some pointers or some suggestions as you would practice weekly planning. Again, you're in the driver's seat. For me, it's Sunday evening. It could be Monday evening. It could be Wednesday evening, depending on what the scope of your work looks like on a week to week level. You do you, but here are some of the what we have found to be helpful practices. Obviously, you plan the week before the week begins. I wouldn't recommend that you do this early Monday morning as things are already underway. You want to get that ahead of the week, of course, so that makes perfect sense. Certainly, you want to schedule your highest priorities. You want to make sure that those priorities are going to bring about the greatest level of results. Remember that when it comes to people, if you need to build trust with people, then they're going to be near your top priority. If you need to reduce time and there's a process that you have to step into, that's also your priority. You get to cast the vision through a whole life lens on. This is really important, folks. The reality is we sometimes convince ourselves that we could compartmentalize ourselves. And so we leave our personal lives at home and we have our professional lives at work. Can I just tell you something? All of you is where you are, always. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't push things to the back of your mind and focus on what you need to focus on in order to be at home or in order to be at work. But the reality is all of you is where you are. And so I have found personally that if things are not going well at home, if my personal life is just not going well, it's going to affect in some way, shape, or form, to some level, it's going to affect my work. Conversely, if there's high stress at work, if things aren't just running smoothly, if I keep bumping up against the wall, say in my relationships or with a process that I can't seem to see myself through, that's going to affect me at home. And so just remember that as you're planning your week, you have to make room for the human element and recognize that you have personal lives and you're going to need to have that balance. And so that's why we say we always need to build in some breathing space. Make sure that you're not just rubbing up one appointment after another, that you're creating enough, just say about 20% breathing space for you to be successful, for you to actually regain yourself and gain some perspective. Now, another thing kind of flowing out of weekly planning is we get down to daily prioritization. Now, this is very, very important. So we already have the week at a scope, at a glance, but then every single day, so every morning, perhaps you're looking at that day's priorities. And so maybe on Sunday evening, it made sense that you placed one priority on a Tuesday morning, but once you arrive Tuesday morning, you realize that that priority has changed. And this is really, really important because life changes. So what's the benefit of daily prioritization? Well, here are some suggestions as we do this. Plan the day before the day begins. I know, a big eureka moment. It's not like you wouldn't consider that, right? But the question is not that I didn't know that. The question is, are we walking in that? Secondly, schedule your highest priorities. Use some sort of ranking system. Again, if you're finding that you need to build trust with people, make that a priority. If you need to be more attentive to a process that is not working for you, make sure you work the process. Make that a priority for that day. Protect your personal commitments, right? Making sure that all of you is intact and that kind of the unity of your mind, of your soul, of your body, it's all working in conjunction with where you need to be and what you need to do at work. And then just like we did at your weekly kind of at a glance planning, you need to make sure that every day you protect some breathing space. And again, we're going to suggest about 20% in order to do that. I'm just curious, again, how many of you do that? How many of you plan your weeks? How many of you plan your days? You need to make sure that the balance of life is held intact, making sure that you are who you need to be when you're at work, but also conversely, who you need to be when you go home. And so when it comes to daily prioritization, I have kind of a wind down routine that I have to adopt in order to go home to be with my kids and to be attentive and to talk to my wife about how things have gone that day. And for me, that means that a half hour before I'm actually getting into my car, I have to adopt, and this is just me, but I start almost going home before I go home. And sometimes that commute can be helpful, but conversely, coming into work every single morning, there's kind of a wind-up routine that I also engage with, which is I'm arriving at work before I'm at work. And I know it seems like it's just a bunch of mental games, but what I'm doing is that I'm managing myself, right? I have the week at a glance. I have the scope intact, but day to day brings about different challenges and different obstacles and priorities that I need to manage. Well, in order to do that well at work, you need to actually have a mindset that's prepared to walk into that day. So making sure that all these things, you plan the day before it begins. That's the mindset, right? Schedule your highest priorities. That's being realistic with whether it's a people challenge or it's a process challenge. Making sure that you protect your personal commitments, again, because all of you is where you are. And then obviously protecting your breathing space because life does change. Things do change. And so we have to be able to pivot. We have to be able to shift because those are things that are obviously outside of our control, but we need to just be prepared for those things. And then lastly, so we've talked about weekly planning and the benefit of that. We've talked about daily prioritizing ourselves and the mindset that we need to have day to day in order to do that. Lastly, we're going to talk about managing your energy. Now, managing energy is something that I think we easily take for granted. We live in a world, I think, that sometimes values burning at both ends and really taking one for the team and working hard. Again, I don't want to beat this to death necessarily, but remember, all of you is where you are. And so if you're burning at both ends, it's not just going to affect your work performance. It's going to affect your life personally. And so it doesn't take a genius to know that your energy level throughout the day, it can be impacted by several factors, right? The first of which is, what's your sleep cycle look like, right? Are you aware of that? So sometimes in order to have a strong, focused, energized day at work, I have to wake up that morning and make sure that I'm heading to the office mentally before I get to the office. But actually, if we're being honest, maybe that means I'm starting the night before and I'm aware of my evening routines. and I'm aware of what my body needs and what my mind needs in order to get a well-balanced night's rest. Your brain needs to kind of deconstruct and kind of settle down and reorganize itself. Sleep is highly beneficial, and it's a healthy way to live. I can assure you, if you don't know that already. Obviously, your diet, being aware of what you eat and drink. Now, folks, I just kind of want to hit the pause button. Have you noticed something? We're talking about time management, but what are we not talking about? We're not talking about time. We're talking about things that you can control. We're talking about managing yourself. Remember the set of perceptions that lead to behaviors. We're talking about behaviors that ultimately, in the area of time management, will bring about a set of results. So here we're talking about time, and here we find ourselves that in order to do so, we have to talk about our day-to-day life energy. Here's another consideration. Are you a morning person? Or are you an afternoon person or an evening person? This is going to be important when you're doing your weekly planning or your day-to-day prioritizing. If you're not an afternoon person, like that's just the worst time for anyone to ever have a conversation with you, perhaps you shouldn't be planning meetings at 2 in the afternoon. Maybe you need to have those very, very important meetings somewhere between 8 and 10 a.m., right? You just need to know how to manage yourself. And as you're doing your daily prioritizing, you're being fully aware of when you are best on for the work to be done at hand. And then lastly, are you introverted or are you extroverted? Right? Do you get your energy from people, or do you find that you get energy kind of when you have some space and solitude in order to think and to prepare? This is very important in order to be successful, right? In order to maybe perhaps build trust, or in order to see yourself in a process that you have to live through and you have to work through. All of these are factors in order to succeed in the area of time management. So, are you getting enough sleep? They say you need about 7 to 9 hours, roughly. What kind of things do you do in order to wind down in order to get sleep? Are you aware of what you're eating and drinking? Is it caffeine? Does caffeine just rob you of energy later? Do you need to change your diet? Are you a morning or afternoon person or evening person? And are you introverted or extroverted? All these are factors. And I promise you that if you put these things into practice, again, those behaviors that are stemming from perceptions of yourself and the environment in which you're in, you will begin to walk in a certain set of results. Now look at this quote from Robert McCracken. This is actually somewhat funny in terms of where we know we are today. But a 40-hour work week is now common, and automation and technology will probably reduce it within the lifetime of the rising generation to 25 to 30 hours a week. I mean, there was this notion that technology would actually help us manage our time better, but we all know that it's actually done the direct opposite. It's kind of hardwired our brain to always kind of be on and to have this notion that we could be everywhere at once. If anything, it's become kind of a great obstacle to us. And so we have to be aware of those things that end up robbing our time. Those factors that, again, are outside of our control. We really can't change the world in which we live. Technology isn't a fad. It's not going away. The internet isn't a fad. That's not going away. Our phones are forever attached to our person. That's not going to go away. But how we live in a world where these factors are present, again, by managing ourselves and getting out ahead of certain processes, is going to help us be successful. I want to direct your attention to this short little video. This is by a guy named Kevin DeYoung. He wrote a book called Crazy Busy. And he has a little, I think, thought that would be helpful as we talk about those things that are time thieves.
The chat box.
I could drop it. Are you hearing the video now?
Yes.
Very good.
Lightly, you may want to turn up the
I'm sure
volume.
struggled with busyness for a long time, and so we shouldn't think that our day is totally different. But one thing that certainly is unique is the prevalence of technology, and how does that fit in? Twitter and Facebook and blogs and emails and texting and all the rest. And I think there are a number of challenges. I just think two real quickly. One is the way technology constantly wants to poke us, and it gives us a desire for that poke. And there have been studies actually that are arguing that the constant use of the internet actually rewires some of the thinking in our brain and how we process things, from linear in books and delayed gratification, long processes of reasoning, to immediate gratification and needing something right now. So when I talk about this poke, I mean, you start to get this feeling that there's a whole world out there, and I need to hear about it right now. I need somebody to tweet something. I need to see what's going on Facebook. And something happens. It's a physiological thing. I think it's a spiritual thing too. It's a self-imposed kind of restlessness that comes with technology. And then the other thing is the way technology blurs all the distinctions in our life. So we don't go to work and then we're done. Or back in the agrarian days, you have the sun to tell you when you're done working. You're not going to go plow the field when the sun's down. But now it all blurs together. When you're at work, you're sort of booking a flight, and when you're at home, you're catching up on emails. And so we don't have any of this rhythm to our daily life. And technology just makes us all into a kind of rhythmless blur, and that feeds into our busyness and into our feeling of constant work and exhaustion.
But in the area of kind of the technological landscape, in the area of the 5 most common time challenges, right? We're just talking about technology. We have found that in these top 5, the first one is certainly email. Now, how many of you don't get enough email? You want more email, like you love email? Absolutely not. I mean, email just stresses me out. I can't go on vacation. I have to go on vacation for 2 weeks because it takes about a week for me just to kind of detox myself off of my buzzing phone. And my wife makes me put it into a drawer. And so email is always a challenge for sure. Now, keep something in mind, though, as we're talking about email, okay? Remember, in the area of time management, what's really important is, remember, building trust and reducing time with process. There's a person on the other side of that email, right? And so as we're interacting with people, we might find that, yes, there's a way to rightly respond. There's a way to helpfully respond that is still very generous. It's very gracious, but it also suggests that, hey, I don't have the time to go too far with this right now. And so we all have been in the situation, perhaps, where we receive a very trite email or a trite text where the response is no period. And it hits sideways versus no exclamation mark versus, plus emoji. Like there's a person on the other side of that email. And so as we're talking about those time thieves, just know that there's a way to manage our email in a way that is very helpful, keeping in mind that maybe there's a time during the day that you're not best to sit and focus on email. Maybe that's a morning routine. Maybe that's an afternoon routine for you, depending on when you're on or when you're not. Another time thief has got to be our cell phones, right? We always find ourselves being attached to our phones, and many of us, it kind of is a little bit of a maybe a ruling substance in our lives, and so we have to be aware of that. They can be very, very distracting. I remember how social media has taken off the past 10 years, and so that's obviously a function of our phones, and so being aware of how that contributes to robbing us of our time. Of course, there are interruptions that occur all the time in the workspace and the work offices. I call them drive-bys, and so sometimes I can't help but maybe let my admin know that, hey, right now I just can't have anyone stop by. But what happens when my admin is not there to maybe create a buffer? There are certain things that I've learned that has been very helpful. I'll have perhaps a friend or a colleague swing by the office and ask that question, hey, do you have a minute? Well, I've learned that in order to kind of circumvent the time thief of the interruption, I can simply say, well, do you actually have 1 minute? Will it take 1 minute? I'd be happy to give you 1 minute. right? Or when someone swings by the office or the cubicle, sometimes it's very helpful to stand up and kind of create a sense of urgency in that conversation or in that meeting that you find yourself suddenly thrust in. The same is true going back to the use of your cell phone. If you need to make important calls and you just have to get through that call list, sometimes it's helpful to stand up and walk. Again, it brings about a sense of energy and it brings about a sense of urgency in that conversation, and it will help you as you manage your time. And then, of course, we all are aware of how procrastination can rob us of our time. There's something innate within most people where we tend to procrastinate, right? You remember school, college, or the workplace when you're kind of given 3 months for a project and the assignment to be completed within that framework of time, right? When do most people start working on it? Well, man, you've ever pulled the all-nighter in school or in college? People do it all the time in the workplace. And so procrastination is obviously kind of a result of, I'd say, poor planning, whether it be weekly planning or not prioritizing the day-to-day or not managing your energy levels. This all contributes to the result of procrastination. And then, of course, lastly, fifthly, a great time thief is the area of just meetings. I can't tell you, we've all been there where we have been in a meeting and you walk away from that meeting and you think to yourself, boy, that could have been an email. That could have been a memo, right? And so a good suggestion here is if you are leading the meeting, especially once you hit that hour mark, perhaps the meeting doesn't need to go that long, but if it does, and sometimes it really does need to, you can simply ask the question in a gracious way to everyone in the room, hey, if you feel you don't need to be here at this point in time, you can go ahead and be dismissed. Or if you yourself are aware that there are people that no longer need to continue on in the meeting, you can be very gracious and help them along as well. But team meetings tend to rob us of our time, perhaps because of poor planning, perhaps because they're not being led well, they're not being managed or facilitated well. Again, this all backs into the areas and the domains that we've already discussed when it comes to weekly planning and daily prioritizing, and perhaps even managing our energy well, ourselves well. These all cause the results of whether it be email, technology, phone use, procrastination, calendaring, team meetings. It all is interconnected. And so we find that those are the 5 great time thieves that we need to be aware of. And if we can get out ahead of it, if we can be aware of these areas, and as we're prioritizing our day and weekly managing ourselves and preparing our week, we will be better off. Again, we live in a world that really does value, I'd say, busyness. And we have to be aware that there is that cultural pressure. We somehow value burning at both ends and really running ourselves into the ground. My friends, listen to me. In the long run, you have to play the long game here. There is nothing noble in that, right? You risk much when you're not managing yourself well or taking care of yourself well, and you will walk in the results that are unfavorable when it comes to managing your time. So please be aware of, maybe it's not as immediate within the workspace. Maybe it's not even immediate within kind of your personal domain, but we live in a culture that kind of values that, probably just intuitively, and having that awareness, living antithetical to that, willingly living antithetical to that, creating the space that we need in order to thrive. Please be aware that that's very, very important, and that will bring about the results that we are going to best thrive in. Never, ever, ever mistake activity for achievement. Just because you look busy, just because you look like you are kind of on that in the cul-de-sac of insanity and you're running on the hamster wheel, it doesn't mean that anything is necessarily being achieved. And so there's nothing, it's not a fool's errand to slow down, to reevaluate, to reorganize your thoughts. And if you manage yourself well, if you care for yourself well, the results will be very, very beneficial. And you'll be able to relate to other people better. You'll have a better sense of yourself. You'll understand how efficiency plays into those relationships that you're building trust in. All right. So again, building trust with people, reducing time with processes, and understanding where those processes are being robbed and being challenged by those time thieving challenges that we just discussed. Remember this, it's a great quote by Mark Buchanan. It's very, very poetic. Generous people have more time. Contrawise, those who guard every minute, right? You can go ahead and read it there. Interruption, ration every moment, never have enough. They're always late, always behind, always scrambling, always driven. Just take a minute to finish that quote. Folks, as we wrap things up here, keep in mind what we've reviewed past hour. I apologize for the little technical interruptions and the workbook and everything, but remember this, everything we discussed, we really did know, right? Everything we've discussed in the area of time management derived from principles, right? That hold together a set of perceptions and behaviors that cause us to walk in the results that we are in. And so if you would just slow down, if you'd build the space, if you organize yourself, if you view others according to certain principles, that's going to allow for trust to build. And you work on those principles that allow for processes to be most efficient, being aware and guarding against the time thieves that are certainly in our day-to-day. Again, we trust that the results you walk in will cause you to thrive. We do have a few resources always that we would want to highlight for you in the area of time management. New Leaf is always looking to help people thrive in the workplace through one-to-one training, coaching, and certainly resourcing is a part of that process. It's been a pleasure being with you. We love serving people for them professionally to thrive, but also knowing that there's a direct correlation to how that personally will affect them as well. And of course, we want to highlight our podcasts and our newsletter. We have the QR code there for you. Subscribing is free, and we promise you we're not going to bombard you with email once you subscribe, but it would be there to serve you and to better your world of work. So we ended a few minutes early, but I just wanted to thank you for your time, and I would then kick it over to my friends who are facilitating from here.
Aaron, we really appreciate that. On behalf of the California Placement Association, we really value everything that New Leaf has done for us and the support and the fact that you've been a true loyal, I'm going to say, partner with the California Placement Association. Thank you so much, Aaron, for being here today. Thank you for those incredible quotes, the resources with the links that you provided us for the workbook and the assessment, and a time to reflect and a time to, I'm going to say in a couple of things, mirror some areas that I need to change. So I'm going to work on that with technology and everything. I can't be so generous with my time. I think I fall a little bit in that area. That's probably one of my weak areas and stuff. But Aaron, it's an honor to have you. Thank you so much. So on behalf of the California Placement Association Board and all its members and all our audience, a big round of applause to you, and we thank you. And thank you for the gift of time.
Thank you so much.
All right. Here we will be March 1st through the 3rd, 2023 at the Doubletree Hilton at the Golf Resort in Palm Springs. We look forward to seeing you there. Think about it, save the date, start mentioning it, and plan it on your fiscal budget for next year so that we can see you live and in person.